Her Majesty the Queen's children stand vigil in Westminster Hall.
More than a week has passed since the death of Her Majesty the Queen, and it is here within the Palace of Westminster that she has been lying in state ever since Wednesday afternoon. Many thousands of people have been paying their respects, as they are now, and it is here that her 4 children will do the same in just a few moments' time. This morning, King Charles and Camilla the Queen Consort were in Wales as part of their visits to the home nations. They attended a service of thanksgiving at Llandaff Cathedral, where they met members of the public. And the King then made an unprecedented address to the Senedd, which was followed by a private audience with the Welsh First Minister, Mark Drakeford. And any moment now, they will be leaving Buckingham Palace to travel to the Houses of Parliament and to the great ancient hall where the Queen has been resting. It's a beautiful evening in London, and we've seen people from all over the country patiently queuing for many hours to pay tribute to Her Majesty. It's been clear what a moving, almost overwhelming experience it has been for many of them, and indeed for people watching at home. We're expecting to see all 4 of the Queen's children leaving the palace shortly and coming to Westminster Hall, where they will be part of a very special and poignant tribute. They'll be standing vigil together beside her coffin, and they will remain there in silence. Amid all the ceremony of this time, all the duties the King has been performing, not just in London, but right across the home nations, amid all of that, this will be a moment for stillness and for peaceful reflection for him and for his 3 siblings, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York, the Earl of Wessex, who are mourning a queen, but more than anything else, their mother, who they lost only 8 days ago. And so we're expecting to see them in the next few moments leave Buckingham Palace on this late summer evening and travel into Westminster Hall, where those who are paying their respects in the hall at that time will see the 4 of them together at the side of the coffin. And it looks like they are just about to leave Buckingham Palace. The outriders are out of the palace gates. Queen Consort will be with the King, but it'll be the 4 of them standing together as they were in Edinburgh at St Giles's Cathedral. But in the setting of Westminster Hall, it is of course the most historic, the most ancient part of the Palace of Westminster, a place with immense resonance in the history of our national story, the history of our monarchy, and therefore a particularly resonant setting for them to stand vigil together as they are about to do. And there they are now, coming out of the palace gates and beginning that short journey across to Westminster. That's the King's car in the front, bearing the royal standard. And we'll see them in Westminster Hall very shortly. And as they are on their way to Westminster Hall, it will be a special moment for the Queen's children, for whom, of course, this has been a time when their private grief has had to be alongside their public duty. They have received condolences from across the country and around the world. But as they travel to Westminster Hall tonight, it is in remembrance of their mother, their beloved mother, more than anything else. And each of them will have their own memories as they make this journey of their time with her through the decades.
I was very lucky to have her as a mother. I do have very happy memories of childhood. I remember we used to have lots of laughs, so I could sometimes make her laugh anyway, which was always very jolly.
She was always the Queen because that was really important for all of us. But she was always my mother, so that is how you remember her.
We weren't appendages that should be seen and not heard. We were definitely the priority.
The happiest times inevitably that we'd spend together would be on holidays, because of the time that we spent together as a family.
I mean, she was always there, and I again talked to her about this, that, or the other, and that's something that's, well, it'll be very difficult not to have, if you know what I mean. So all those memories will, I hope, keep me going.
Through the centuries, Westminster Hall has witnessed many significant royal occasions. Tonight, Her Majesty will be only the second monarch whose children have stood vigil for her. And as they arrive at Westminster Hall, Petroc Trelawney is waiting inside.
The atmosphere here at Westminster Hall, calm, solemn, and perhaps in the air a sense of bittersweetness. People mourning the monarch's death, while at the same time reflecting on her long life and her 70-year reign. This great room is full of people, but it's almost silent here. Just the odd interruption, the sound of military boots ricocheting off the stone floor, the duty officer tapping commands with his stick, and the occasional cry of a child. It's been like this since 5 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, when Black Rod, the parliamentary officer in charge of maintaining order in the Lord's Chamber and its precincts, signalled that the doors of the hall could be opened to the public, patiently queuing outside. 50 hours or so have elapsed since that moment. People at the head of what has felt at times like an infinite line have filed in past the coffin, paying their private respects to the late Queen. Some people walk by the catafalque lost in private thoughts. Some bow or curtsy. Some hold their hands in prayer or make a sign of the cross. Others turn on their heel and look back, raising their hand in an informal salute as they say their farewells. Some of the visitors here knew the Queen personally or worked for her, but most of us in this hall only knew her from a distance, as the monarch, photographed in a newspaper, seen on television, or perhaps encountered for a few precious seconds during a walkabout after the opening of a theatre or hospital or another public building. For 15 minutes this evening, the Queen's subjects will be joined by her children, the King, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex and Forfar, 4 siblings mourning the death of their mother. Well, the Union flag lowered atop Victoria Tower, changed for the Royal Standard. The royal party will mount vigil alongside the royal bodyguard, the gentlemen-at-arms and the yeomen of the guard, and appropriately on this day when so much of the focus has been on Wales, 4 officers from the Welsh Guards. The first royal vigil here was in 1936, the final night of the vigil for George V, when the new king, Edward VIII, decided to stand watch around the catafalque with his brothers as a tribute to their late father. The king was joined by the Dukes of Gloucester and Kent and the then Duke of York, who later that same year became George VI. He was to lie in state here when he died in 1952, and now, 70 years later, his daughter rests in Westminster Hall. Well, this is the second time that Her Majesty's children have stood vigil. They did so on Monday evening while the coffin lay in St Giles's Cathedral in Edinburgh. In 24 hours, an estimated 33,000 people filed through to pay their respects. Much has been said this week about a moment of quiet reflection for us, the population, but also the Queen's children reflecting their own grief. As the Queen said in her message of condolence to the families of victims lost in the 9/11 attacks in New York, nothing that can be said can begin to take away the anguish and pain of these moments. Grief is the price we pay for love.
Well, this royal vigil will begin at 7:45 and you will be able to see it here. For now, in the studio, though, I'm joined by Katie Nicholl, royal biographer, and also by Giles Brandreth, writer and broadcaster. We did see the 4 of them stand together in Edinburgh earlier this week, but this is a very different setting. Giles, how would you describe the importance of this moment?
It's very significant. We heard the Princess Royal only a few moments ago. We heard her voice saying that, of course, the Queen was always the Queen, but she was also a mother. And tonight we see them doing a personal tribute to the Queen, but in public. This is a private moment, but it's played out in public. And that is the life that these children of the late Queen have led all their lives. So it's a strange experience for them. But they will be there as children of the sovereign, and still filing past will be the members of the public. And it's clear, I met people in the queue today, it's clear that they are so happy to be there, so proud to be there, so keen to be there to pay their respects. As somebody said to me, she was the best, and she has brought out the best in us. And so it's a wonderful combination of the private and the public.
Yes, and the Earl of Wessex's statement released earlier today, Katie, actually addressed exactly that they've grown up having to share their parents, especially their mama.
I think it really brings it home to you, doesn't it, to read Prince Edward, the Earl of Wessex speak like that. You know, not many of us have to share our parents with the Commonwealth and the realms and the whole country, and so they have grown up with this private-public balance. But I think what must be so important for them in this vigil is, of course, the times that they didn't have to share her, the times at Balmoral, the summers that were made so special, you know, when the late Duke and the Queen would teach them to stalk and to fish and to enjoy those foothills of Balmoral and the Highlands in the way that the Queen and the Duke always did, and those wonderful Christmases at Sandringham. You know, we've heard in these tributes wonderful recollections of these family times, you know, being buried in the sand at Holcombe Beach. And I think, of course, we are mourning our Queen, but we forget that these 4 children are mourning a mother. And of course, we were only allowed inside the palace walls at certain times. It's almost in her death that we've actually been allowed in far more.
Giles, in this setting in Westminster Hall, there was the vigil for the Queen Mother in 2002, and 3 of, not Princess Anne, but the 3 other siblings were part of that.
It's a place for royal vigils. I mean, Queen Mary lay in state there back in 1953. The Queen Mother and then her children, family, were there for that. It's history. It is our royal history. You know, William the Conqueror was built after his time. William Rufus actually built it. Richard II, I think, designed that extraordinary hammer beam roof. It is the story of our royal history. So it's the right place for them to be. And it is where our kings and queens have been laid to rest. There have been these lyings in state, occasionally for a commoner. I think Gladstone in the 19th century, Lord Roberts, VC, and then, of course, Winston Churchill, the Queen's first Prime Minister.
And 24 hours a day, as we see now, there are people who've waited a long, long time for the opportunity, and some of them will be in the hall when the King and his siblings begin their vigil.
I mean, what an extraordinary moment that will be, not just to stand in front of the late Queen and pay tribute, but to see our new King there. An extraordinary moment, and as Giles says, quite fitting that these historical moments are being made in the most historical hall in Great Britain. But yes, for these people, a special moment indeed.
And the Queen's children will be beginning their vigil shortly, so let's rejoin Petrock inside Westminster Hall.
Candle burns in front of the royal standard. These candles that burn for 24 hours, replaced each evening when the hall is briefly shut in the small hours. And behind the candle, the imperial state crown and the orb and sceptre. Many of these people filing in will have no idea that they're about to share their moment of vigil, their moment of paying respect with the Queen's children. The Welsh Guards doing their duty. An officer on each corner of the coffin, their uniform distinguished with their buttons arranged in 2 groups of 5. A leek on their shoulder and collar badges, and you can see the white-green white plume on the left of their bearskins. The Westminster Cross that stands at the head of the coffin. And a bouquet of flowers, a wreath of white roses and dahlias studded with pine from the gardens at the Royal Estate in Balmoral, where the Queen died last Thursday. The gardens at Windsor, the Queen's main home in later years. Lavender, pittosporum and rosemary, the symbol of remembrance. Yeomen of the Guard, one of the royal bodyguards, doing their duty in this vigil. And all this under the great hammer beam roof of Westminster Hall. This great open space without a single pillar to obstruct the view. As the public enter the south of the hall, look down the steps, they're immediately struck by the vision of Her Majesty's coffin, resting on its catafalque and bier of red and purple. The Welsh Guards, established at the height of the First World War, that's when they were raised. The duty officer, using his stick to instruct the men. And here come the Queen's children, the King, the Princess Royal, the Earl of Wessex and Forfar, and at the rear of the party, the Duke of York. walk forward to the catafalque. They'll take place one on each side. The Queen's children paying respect as they mark vigil to their mother here in Westminster Hall. And so with 3 taps from the duty officer's stick, this extraordinarily visible act of private mourning comes to an end. The Queen's children standing vigil in front of their mother's coffin here in Westminster Hall. A formal duty to the nation, a loving duty to their mother. The King, the Princess Royal, the Duke of York and the Earl of Wessex, and 4 for their faces, stoic as they stood there, with a steady stream of members of the public filing past. These people who have come from near and far to make this pilgrimage to express their sorrow at the death of the Queen. Well, tonight's vigil reflects the relationship between the monarchy and the state. 4 members of a family mourning their personal loss, surrounded by hundreds paying tribute to a loved and respected figurehead, a meeting of private and public grief. Our continuous coverage of the lying in state continues on the BBC Red Button, at the BBC website, on the BBC Parliament channel and on the iPlayer. It'll be there until Monday morning, when Her Majesty the Queen leaves Westminster Hall for a final journey to Westminster Abbey and on to Windsor Castle. Meanwhile, those at the head of this vast, slow-moving, snaking line of people continue to descend the steps into Westminster Hall. Some have carefully planned for their time in the queue. Others have joined, it seems, on an impulse. I've seen sturdy outdoor gear alongside summer shorts, school children in blazers, guides and scouts, men and women wearing the black of mourning, brightly coloured kente cloths, pale salwar kamises, suits, workwear, jeans, clerical collars. Elderly couples supporting each other as they pass the coffin. Teenagers standing in awe. Family groups spanning several generations. A mother holding a toddler, almost too big for her arms. Tens, hundreds of thousands of people, all united in their desire to pay their final respects to Her Majesty the Queen.
It is and continues to be a snapshot of our society. All of these people brought together because of their desire to be there to pay their respects to the Queen as she lies in state. And what we've just seen in the vigil of the King, his 2 brothers and his sister is likely to be one of the enduring images of this time, the scene of the 4 of them with their heads bowed and all those people who happened to be in Westminster Hall at that time continuing to go past as the 4 of them stood there. Giles Brandreth and Katie Nicholl are still with me. What did you think, Charles?
Well, it's moving, but it's also remarkable because here you're seeing private mourning in a public place. There they were, the 4 children of the Queen who died only 8 days ago. We're watching it on television, and people are filing past at the same time. It sums up, in a sense, this curious phenomenon that we have in this country of a royal family. And then watching them were members of that extended family. I saw there, I think, the Duke of Kent and the Duke of Gloucester. They are the grandsons of King George V, who lay in state there back in 1936. So this was both personal and public, historic and private.
And there were several generations. They had brought their children as well, members of the royal family.
Yes, I mean, it was quite surprising. We weren't expecting that. And, again, a reminder that this is a family mourning, a family of many generations. And I think just reflecting on what it must have been like for those members of the public who were in the hall at that time, what an extraordinary moment to witness, and one that they will no doubt remember forever. But I think that connection between the royal family and the members of the public has been a really important one ever since the death of the Queen. I mean, you can see that in the crowds that they've been meeting on their walkabouts, that they are drawing as much support from the public and the support of the public as the public are in seeing these royals. But for those that stood in front of their new king while paying respect to the old monarch, extraordinary.
And there has been such a cross-section of people through the day. I mean, this is a day where that line had to be paused because there were just so many people. But we saw a whole range of people from different walks of life, whether it was celebrities or...
we even saw David Beckham, who apparently turned up at 2 a.m. and joined the queue. It is extraordinary. And I've been thinking about it. I mean, obviously, this is part of our history. It is not for everybody, but whether you are monarchist or Republican, kings and queens have been part of our island story. But there's something more going on here. And I think it's because in a dark world where there is a lot that is bad, the Queen was good. She was an exemplar of goodness, and people are reaching out for that and wanting almost to touch it, to say thank you, and to celebrate the decency of the Queen, the extraordinary phenomenon that she was.
And none of us can understand what it is like to have your grief in the public eye, as these 4 children have had to do. But I wonder, picking up on what Katie said, Giles, whether there is also a comfort that has come to them from seeing the way that people have appreciated their mother.
The Earl of Wessex, in his statement today, spoke exactly of that, how strange it had been in a way for him to share his mother all his life with the public, but how, having grieved at first in private, coming out to meet the public, how they found that so comforting. They will ultimately have a totally private moment on Monday evening in the King George VI chapel named after the Queen's father. It will just be the close members of the family alone when the Queen is ultimately laid to rest alongside her late husband, the Duke of Edinburgh.
Yes,
that will be entirely private.
They will be buried together, and that's why you looked at the 4 of them and thought they must be thinking of their late father as well as their mother.
Yeah, totally. And possibly saying a prayer. It's worth remembering when you think, oh, that's so formal, are we putting them through too much? That they've been brought up to this, and the Queen valued this. She valued a uniform. She valued precision. She wanted things to be done correctly. She saw the virtue of tradition, that sometimes these things help people get through, knowing that you've got to do this. Part of your duty actually helps you live better. It's worth remembering that when Diana died, she took her grandsons to church that morning. People thought, oh, why? But she thought, no, actually we will do what we normally do. We go to church on a Sunday morning. We keep going. And they're keeping going.
And Katie, there are new traditions being made as well, or at least new instances that may become traditions, because tomorrow we'll have the Queen's grandchildren standing vigil.
And don't forget, we had Princess Anne there today, the Princess Royal. I mean, that didn't happen last time. So
last time in Westminster Hall.
Exactly. And so that you're seeing sort of modernisation and progression all the time. And yes, we have now had it confirmed that there will be a vigil for the Queen's 8 grandchildren, something that has never happened before. And that will also be a very, very important moment for those grandchildren to be able to go and stand vigil, to pay tribute, to be a breath away from the members of public while they do that. That dichotomy between public and private that they've navigated their entire lives, particularly the new Prince of Wales, will be there, will be living it out tomorrow. It's very apparent in that moment.
Katie Nicholl and Giles Brandreth, many thanks to you both. Well, people are continuing to queue. That is happening 24 hours a day. They are waiting to pay their respects to the Queen, and some will have had the opportunity in her lifetime to meet her. Sir David Attenborough is someone who knew Her Majesty for many years, both personally and through his work as a BBC producer and executive. So here are his reflections going right back to the 1940s.
Well, I first met the Queen in 1947. I was serving in the Navy, doing my national service, at Greenwich. One of the teaching staff was a certain Prince Philip, and there are special evenings where you have a formal dinner. And he brought this beautiful princess on his arm. And I remember her walking up and smiling. She looked regal, but she also looked perfectly at home. I mean, this was her where she should be. And I've never forgotten that. She liked the outdoors. I suppose it was the freedom, the absence of stuffiness. It's very difficult to be stuffy on a grass moor. I remember one Christmas broadcast, and it was my first broadcast, and I was overcome. She was well aware this was the one time when she spoke one-to-one, and she cherished that. I decided it would be nice if we could do it in the stables, a Christmassy thing anyway. And we ended up with a situation in which she was talking with horses around her. She did it absolutely perfectly.
Christmas is a festival for all Christians, but it is particularly a festival for children.
And I said, thank you so much. And the cameraman started pulling my sleeve, and I brushed him away and went on. But then eventually he was very insistent. I said, what is the matter? He said, go again. I said, if you leave the lens cap on, I mean, what do you mean, go again? So I thought I would take his advice. So she did it again. And of course she did it perfectly. And after it was over, I said, why on earth? What was the matter? Was there something wrong with the focus or something? He said, the cameraman said, no, but there was a horse immediately behind her. And as she started speaking, he got that sort of itch in his upper lip, which horses sometimes get. So that he had been doing this sort of thing while she was talking, he said, and it looked as though he was a sort of ventriloquist act, and it really wasn't right for the mood. So I said, thank you very much.
A very happy Christmas to you all.
There are times when it is proper to be formal. That was what was required, and that was therefore what she did. And that was why it was all the more heartwarming when the ice cracked, and the smile was a genuine one and not a formal one. And those occasions did happen and were to be treasured.
Sir David Attenborough there with his memories of the Queen, including that rather surprising Christmas broadcast. And what we've seen tonight has been both a ceremonial and a family moment. A moment for the Queen's 4 children, and indeed a historic one, only the second time that a monarch's children have stood vigil in Westminster Hall. We'll be back tomorrow when it will be the Queen's grandchildren standing vigil. Tonight, as people continue to pay their respects to their Queen, we'll leave you with these images.